Like, you're just springing this
Well, I
one on
think,
me.
yeah, I know,
I'll just
it
ask
was
you
sprung on me
questions.
too. Yeah,
Oh, I see.
Don't worry, I'll prompt you, so
totally,
you don't have
yeah.
to.
Well, and so to describe who Dave is, did Jeremy give you the heads up?
You're gonna tell me right now.
Ah, there we go. Take it away, Dave.
So I'm Dave McLeod, and I worked for Husky for 37 and a half years, running their NGL division for 30 of the last of those 30 years. So I was responsible for everything that had to do with NGLs at Husky in Canada. So gas plants, production facilities, the whole 9 yards.
Awesome. And yourself?
I am the director of HSE product at Spira Data Corp. And I met Dave through one of my developers who happened to be his neighbor. And Dave presented a problem that really was something we'd already 90% solved. So it was an easy relationship to start, and philosophies aligned. And yeah, I guess that's just about 3 years later now.
Yep. Yep.
Just about 3 years later, we're still providing service to Husky on a daily basis. We probably run, I don't know, 50 or 60 scheduled events and ensure the compliance of the execution of their NGL business.
Cool. So Dave, can you share with us what your problem was that originally brought you to Spira?
So I had a situation where I was having multiple trucks arrive at a single location to offload product, and in doing so, the way that the business was run is that these things would arrive at random times, which would incur waiting time charges. So in order to figure out how to get around that and to have multiple carriers so that I could get competitive pricing and all that kind of good stuff, I had to figure out a way to get the trucks to schedule into a terminal at set times. And so the initial application was I started using a Google Calendar. The problem with the Google Calendar was that it was open access and everybody could go into it. As a matter of fact, a driver could delete the entire schedule, which would leave you in the lurch. Now, nobody ever did that and that kind of good stuff, but at the end of the day, there wasn't any security or functionality past that. And so in speaking with Carl and some of his developers and stuff like that, we built in some other functionality that allow us to prove to regulators and lawmakers and that stuff that we were in compliance with making sure that when we signed up a contract with the transporter that they were following the rules and regulations and what we had asked for contractually with regard to, you know, making sure that their site orientations were done, the corporate orientations were done, their driver's licenses were valid, the WMIS first aid, and all those other little things that companies would want to have to stay in compliance with the safety. And so we were able to build all that stuff in because you already had most of that stuff done in terms of tradespeople come to job sites and making sure that all their certificates were valid.
Yeah, and then it was as simple as ensuring that the notifications went through to both the operator and the facility holder in real time.
And marrying it to a calendar to determine the time.
Yeah.
And in doing so, it allowed us to be able to show all of the people that were involved in the business that needed to know when the product was going to flow and when it was going to leave and when it was going to arrive. They didn't have to go and dig up emails to find out all that stuff. They could go onto this app and just look at the calendar and see when all the trucks were scheduled to arrive. And so, you know, initially there was a few little things that we had to work out. You know, booking times one after the other proved to be a bit of a flaw, so we put in catch-up times and that kind of good stuff, which would allow a truck to be half an hour late, but still catch up in the schedule, because what was happening is that if a guy missed his time, the next rotation that he could get into the terminal might be 10 hours later. And so we were finding that if the guy was tired and he didn't want to miss his time, he would push, and that's not what we wanted. We want these guys to be safe. And so in order to alleviate that situation, we just put in catch-up time. So we would schedule 3 hours of offload and then 2 hours of just dead time. That was at the scheduler's discretion to allocate to a driver if they needed it. But it also, so the driver went, you know, if I have to pull off for an hour and take care of some personal things or talk on the phone or whatever. It wasn't like, geez, I gotta keep going, even though I'm nodding. Because if I miss that time, then it's gonna be 12 hours before I can offload. And so, in order to take that away, we just were
And I
able to do
think
that.
one of the biggest value points was the ability to manage the behavior of the different people within that value realm. So the behavior of the schedulers was such that they need to ensure that product is always flowing to the sites, but their awareness of whether or not someone was certified to be there is really hard to access until you governed the behavior of the dispatcher, so they couldn't actually schedule the person to go to site unless they met all the criteria required. And then you could manage the behavior of everybody in the case that some exception occurred where a riser was down or a facility had maintenance work required, whatever it might be,
yeah.
so that it's just automatically distributed, not hand to email to text message to whatever in a clunky.
Because you weren't
format.
relying on the dispatchers to check and see if the terminal was operable. And if you had 5 different companies coming in, then you had to make sure that you sent an email to each one of those companies. Now, you couldn't send out a mass email for the most part because everybody could see who you were sending it to. So right away they knew who you were doing business with. And sometimes you wanted them to know that, sometimes you didn't. So it meant 5 different emails going to people to protect information and stuff like this. Whereas if you just blocked off the time and set terminals down for maintenance, all the dispatchers of all the companies see it. And they see it in real time.
And I think
So
it was something where the benefits of the system were a combination of the infrastructure made it so that the operator could communicate with the operating facility, could communicate with the dispatcher, and the subcontractor could communicate with the driver without the telephone game. And then subsequent to that was the ability to prove that the correct behaviors were happening in all cases. So the driver was showing up compliant. They weren't trying to schedule 4 in a block just to beat out the other competitors for specific times.
Yeah, exactly.
There wasn't kind of the monkeying around because the controls were all there and you could see it happening. And then on exceptions, all of the automation of information flows so that if a trucker was en route and there happened to be a maintenance outage, he got a text message, or the dispatcher got an automated email, or basically managing what used to be a very hand-to-hand method in a digital real-time format produced a return on no longer having to pay wait times and on the safety and compliance of the individuals that are executing the work.
And we actually had a situation where a driver drove for 10 hours to a site and was missing one of the certifications, and he was not allowed to load. And even though his attempts to get the operator to load him, and then his dispatcher who phoned me and said, "Oh, come on, let the guy load," it was a safety issue. So the guy was sent away. And it was only by happenstance that the operator said, "Can I see your credentials?" But most of the times, a lot of these trucks are going to unmanned sites, and so there's nobody there. And if that guy had gone to an unmanned site and loaded and had an incident on the way back to wherever he was going, then we could have been held liable, because at the end of the day, they'll say, "Well, what did you do to ensure that the driver was certified to go into your site?" "Well, we told the company that he had to be certified." Well, that's not good enough anymore. You have to prove that you're attempting to get to the core of that information and make sure that these guys are. It's a responsibility of the transporter to do that, but it's also on you to make sure that they're doing what they say that they were doing. This app does it in real time. So there's a huge amount of benefits in terms of cost
Some of the
savings.
some of the interesting residual benefits we didn't even really plan for that I think is super cool is when it comes to the facilities that are unmanned, they don't have systems to secure a gate or things like that. Guys can just drive up. So ensuring that the dispatcher couldn't schedule them meant that you weren't worrying about that problem anymore. But the other benefit was, well, these facilities run at specific rates, and if you overfill them, well, then it's a panic to get out, and your facility has to slow down, so you got to manage the production coming out of the ground.
Yeah.
Or if you underfill them, well, then you got to crank it up again and manage it to fill the tanks. Well, by blocking off certain times and ensuring that the behavior of the dispatchers and the driving companies were managed to those facilities. They run at a constant rate. If something's an anomaly, you can see it 12, 14, 16 hours in advance, and you're not driving out there as the operator to manage the facility. So we didn't really anticipate that right off the bat, but by having that information shared across, the third party executing the work, the operator of the facility, the schedulers and operators at head office, you just catch a lot more of the things that either could cost you or that benefit you. And I see that being a huge element of the benefit go forward, where operators are concerned, is ultimately sharing information saves everybody time and money.
Well, yeah, I mean, and sometimes you don't want to have trucks coming in when there's a shift change going on, because the operators are handing the operation over to the next guy, so they're intent on telling them what the issues were that morning, what to expect coming up and stuff like this. And if a transporter's coming in to offload product or the load product and they're bugging the operators, those operators could miss something. Like I say, well, I gotta hurry up, I gotta go and deal with this guy who's down on the rack. So in the SAP, you can just block off those shift change times and say, we don't want to have any trucks in here during that time. So it allows you to control your operations a lot more, and for the people who need to know when these things are going to happen, that there's a single source to go and get it. Because as you've said in all the presentations, put the data in once and have everybody be able to look at the same data, right? Whereas before it's kind of like, well, I got an email and it was 7 o'clock. Well, some guy might miss that it was 7 a.m. or 7 p.m. And this kind of takes all of the ambiguity out of it. It's right there on the calendar. We can just see its graphic on the screen, and you know that the driver who is coming in there is certified to do what he's supposed to do. And in addition to that, you can also put in the equipment. If the M1s or M5s are all done on the trailers and that stuff. So.
Excellent. So what is the collaborative process like when you're developing these controls? Because obviously every situation is unique in some ways. So there must be some kind of a communication that goes back and forth. How does that work between the two of you to make sure that what you're providing is exactly fitting your specific need?
I think a lot of it has to do with keeping the conversation open and maintaining it over time. So we started with what we thought the ultimate solution was going to be, and then it worked well until somebody booked out 7 in a row and tried to hose the other supplier. Well, okay, we have to restrict the amount that you can book at one time, or the timeline around which you can, and ultimately that's part of the benefit of digital, is that that evolution can happen with a series of clicks, not 14 memos and 84 emails and who did you actually get a hold of and how did that work. It can happen in real time and then provide an audit trail of what actually happened as things change.
Well, it's adaptive too. I mean, some companies may not be concerned about having the ability for a transporter to book for 3 days in a row. But if you have multiple carriers coming in and some guys grabbing all the choice spots and stuff like this, you're going to have some unhappy carriers. And so, there's some learnings along the way, and you've got office and field staff who don't understand the digital world and what the capabilities are. And so if you keep the dialogue open, as Carl says, and kind of go back and forth, you kind of musing, say, can we do this? And the tax guys who don't know your industry might not know that would be something that should be done. They might say, oh, heck yeah, we can do that. That's easy. We'll do this, right? And the people in the office are going, wow, that's amazing, right? So just kind of going back and forth, eventually you get kind of understand the commonalities between the different businesses and that kind of good stuff. I mean, I use this app to govern the flow rates into gas plants and stuff like this. So the operators knew when the loads were going to arrive, so they could set their run rates and stuff like that, which has cost efficiencies for the operators, for the operation itself, just not in the transportation costs, but in the actual operation of the plant itself. There was cost savings through this app. So
I think it's about listening a lot of the time where we're concerned, and careful listening, because you want to make sure that you're providing the solution that'll work for Dave, and that'll work for Sally that does dispatch, and that'll work for Jerry that drives the truck. And
Yeah.
they're very different personas. So
Or Jim the operator.
yeah, exactly.
Or Sally the
Yeah.
operator, you know.
Got to be
At
LPC.
the end of the
right?
day, yeah, but everybody had access to the same data. And if they had a question, they knew who to phone. They could phone the schedule and say, hey, this isn't gonna work, or we just had an incident, so, you know, we need you to block off these times for this maintenance and that kind of stuff, so. Yeah, just more transparency in the scheduling function.
Yeah, and simplified communication.
Yes.
Excellent. So sounds like you love it then.
Yeah, I don't know why everybody isn't using this thing. I really don't. It just, you know, the transporters, by ensuring that when they send a truck to a terminal, that they know that it's going to be offloaded within, say, half an hour of them arriving at the terminal, allows them to more effectively and efficiently manage their fleets. Well, if everybody was on this app, it would increase the capacity of their fleets with zero capital outlay. And as all the transporters will tell you, we make more money when the wheels are rolling, not when they're sitting in a lineup waiting to offload. And this app is a way to ensure that if they really wanted to, they can ensure that that truck's wheels are rolling as much as possible, and not this random driving into a terminal and finding out that there's 5 trucks waiting. You know, it's an hour and a half to offload a truck, 7.5 hours of waiting time, charges at $150 an hour, $200 an hour. Could be an extra $1,500 a load. Well, if you're delivering 10 loads a day, it starts to add up after a while. Especially
That's the
if you
bill
have,
that Dave used to get.
well, yeah, I mean, it's just, it can be crazy. But especially when pipelines break and stuff like that, which they do in the province. And,
It happens.
and all of a sudden everybody's heading for the trucks where you can go and see. And you know, knowing the transporters can also then look on the app and phone the schedule and say, listen, do you have another terminal that you could go to that has times available? Because up at the Glass Terminal, for a truck to sit for 20 hours, not unheard of. Fox Creek, they could sit there for 20 hours at $200 an hour. It's an extra $4,000 a load. So it starts to add up after a while. And if those pipeline breaks sometimes 2 or 3 days, you can have a $12,000-15,000 bill really quickly, and all that stuff. But so
Game changer.
Yeah.
yeah, I think it is.
Excellent.
Cool.
Anything else you guys want to add?
No.
No.
I think that's good.
Yeah.
That was so great. Thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Awesome. Got some bits. Some good bits.
Some
Some
very
good
good
bits.
bits.
Good bits.
The best bit.
Okay.
Thank you so much. It was so nice to meet you too.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you,
Take care,
Rachel.
Dan.
That's great.
Okay, Rachel.
Bye.
Take care.
Yes.